Hey, what's up guys? Physiology for the uninitiated. Today I'm going to make a case for calcium. So, calcium is an ion. Calcium is an electrolyte, and calcium is important not just for bone mineralization, which we'll get into here shortly, but calcium is an important signaling molecule for life. So, not only do we have the bone mineralization component that staves off osteoporosis, but something interesting that I want you guys to understand about calcium is that we have something called a sarcoplasmic reticulum. Sarcoplasmic reticulum. This is a mechanism within the muscle that pumps out calcium. Yes, calcium. And when that calcium is pumped out of the sarcoplasmic reticulum, it will travel over to the actin and myosin chain. Actin and myosin act as the contractile forces, the levers or the mechanisms that create the contraction from muscles to do their thing. So we'll say this is contraction and this is uncontraction, detraction. And so I don't want to dive too deep into this mechanism because we have a lot of things to talk about with calcium, but when calcium works to contract and ATP binds, and also a calcium will come over and bind to the actin and myosin reaction. Boom! Actin and myosin initiate, and the sarcomere, the muscle fiber will then contract and do what it needs to do. See it in real time. Boom. That costed calcium. Also costed ATP, also costed potassium, also costed magnesium, also costed salt, sodium. It costs all of these electrolytes. We're going to talk about all of these in a series of videos I'm going to name electrolytes. So, with the calcium, we have the contractile component, and next we also want to talk about the regulation of the heartbeat. And not only is the heart a smooth muscle because it's an organ, right? It's also a striated muscle, has smooth and striated tissue. So, with the heart muscle, when it is contracting, at the height of the contraction, when it's going from systolic to diastolic, at the height of the contraction, more calcium will load into this heart at the peak of the contraction and allow boom, boom, the second heartbeat. That's what I remember from anatomy and physiology too. Hopefully I didn't make my teacher throw up in her seat. So, if calcium levels are too high, in the event that calcium levels are too high, you endanger yourself to thrombosis, a potential to clogging up your arteries. This is why we want to take accurate supplementation when we take in our calcium. Not only are we taking calcium, but we're also taking magnesium, we're also taking vitamin D3, K2, and this all works synergistically with the calcium to make them all process and shuttle through the pathways necessary to get put into proper storage and not hang out in the blood vessels for too long. So, diving in deeply, so too high, we risk thrombosis. Too low, we'll get muscle spasms because we won't have the optimal amount of calcium needed for muscle contraction, correct? We'll also get numbness and heart instability. Another word for heart instability will be myocardial arrhythmias, heart arrhythmias. This can also happen if you take in too much potassium, because potassium pushes sodium out of the storage and into your kidneys that then get pissed out. a whole slew of things can happen when you have an electrolyte imbalance, which is why it's so important to have that close by, especially when you're in the hospitals, you're watching your electrolyte balance fervently. That's not my job. It's probably a nurse's job. Anyways, moving on to the contractions in the actin-myosin cross bridge, or for the actin and myosin to cross bridge, the calcium attaches onto a mechanism called the troponin. Like I said, if there's no calcium, there's no contraction. Next, moving on to neurological. The calcium opens the axon terminal. So at the end of a neuron, this is perfect. At the end of a neuron, the calcium will travel over, open up the terminals to then shoot off acetylcholine and sodium and whatnot. Mostly acetylcholine for that mechanism. So for that mechanism to even happen, you need calcium to get dumped off to the axon terminal to then open up the floodgates for these for this action potential to happen. And as it fires across the synapse into the other dendrites, these are the dendrites, fires across the synapse into the dendrites, that allows the reaction to catalyze. That's a small note. That's neurology. We're not neurologists. But one thing to take note of is that there are neurons all over your brain. If you're low in potassium, you're low in that ability to fire off those synapses as clearly as you want to. So brain fog, obviously, if you're undercalcified. We want to think about hormonal implications as well. So now we're diving into bone mineralization. Bone mineralization begins at the parathyroid hormone. It increases blood calcium by breaking down the bone. Calcitonin from the thyroid, this is coming from the thyroid, reduces blood calcium and builds the bone. So this is really interesting. You need the signaling from the broken down bone for calcitonin, reduces blood, which will then reduce the blood calcium to build the bone. And this push and pull hormonal battle is what keeps the blood level stable. I'm going to skip that. That was 8:30. All right, bioavailability and supplement energy. Best absorbed with magnesium, D3, and K2. Split doses if taking 500 milligrams. Avoid taking calcium around iron or zinc. It competes for absorption. You don't necessarily have to do that. You could just increase the amount of zinc that you're taking. Calcium citrate or calcium hydroxyapatite is the best forms of calcium that you could be taking. If you're eating a dairy-free diet, plant-based diet, or you're training very, very, very hard, you're losing out on calcium. And if you're losing out on calcium, either you're not intaking enough calcium, or you're intaking calcium and you're not taking the proper supplementation, or you're not getting the proper minerals and vitamins associated with proper calcium absorption, then we're looking at a detriment in calcium uptake. That's bad, and we noted why that was bad. So if you are a physically active person, think about taking at least 500 milligrams in supplement to what you're already naturally getting from a good, well-rounded diet. All right. So, in the event that all right. One more thing that I would like to add is in the event of somebody not being an efficient nose breather, and we've talked about nose breathing, and this wraps around somebody's calcium levels. So this will be very interesting. In the event that somebody is not an efficient breather, they will experience a decrease in carbon dioxide within their muscles, within their bones, within their blood. And if your blood CO2 is dropped because of overbreathing, if I'm expelling all of my CO2 and my CO2 levels are too little, and I'm not taking not deep exaggerated breaths, but I'm not breathing properly. Now, what does that look like? You can look into the book Breathe by, his last name is Nestor. You can look into that book and you can find what the proper breathing pattern is and what that entails. One thing that it does entail is that when an individual is breathing properly, he has a balanced level of oxygen and CO2. If you don't have enough CO2, your arteries aren't vasodilating to the extent that they should. Also, CO2 has vasodilatory effects with nitric oxide. Also, CO2 stabilizes the pH level. In the event that there is not enough CO2 and oxygen is more prevalent, the pH of the blood becomes too basic and it starts breaking down the bone, because bone will get broken down into calcium carbonate, carbon dioxide, calcium carbonate, to then equalize the blood pH level. It's interesting, huh? So people become osteoporotic. People exhibit signs of osteoporosis if they're overbreathers. Now, take that for how you want. Really, it's just going to be anecdotal. Hey, I have a little bit of osteoporosis, so let's check what my breathing patterns look like. Usually, health goes hand in hand with one physiological function. So, physiological function that you've been neglecting for a while starts exhibiting some problems, it may have downstream effects affecting you in other places of your life. Interesting thing to think about. Thank you very much for listening. This was Physiology for the Uninitiated. Thank you.